Hello, everyone. My name is Marcy Marr. Many of you know me as the Kootenai Connect manager for Kootenai Conservation Program. However, I'm here today with my CMI board director hat on. CMI, or the Columbia Mountains Institute of Applied Ecology, welcomes you to our webinar. And I'm joined today by Kendall Benish, my colleague from Kootenai Conservation Program, or KCP. CMI and KCP have joined forces again, and this year we present the 10th season of CMI's CRED Talks, which are the Columbia Region Ecological Discussions, and KCP's 12th Winter Webinar Series. I would like to acknowledge that the region that we work in is the unceded homeland of the Sinixt, Secwepemc, Tunaxa, and Syilx Okanagan peoples who've stewarded and cared for the land, water, and wildlife since time immemorial. I'd now like to invite you to use the chat feature to introduce yourself and offer your own land acknowledgement to let us know whose territory you're zooming in from today. This season of webinars will explore the theme of lessons for the next chapter of restoration and stewardship. We're featuring 5 speakers who will discuss this theme from different perspectives, reflecting on key lessons from their careers in ecological restoration, land stewardship, and ecosystem monitoring, and emphasizing important insights that can and should inform future restoration efforts. This year's series is financially supported by Okanagan Nation Alliance, Tech, Ecoscape Environmental Consultants, LGL Limited, as well as KCP's program funders. And today we welcome Randy Harris, a registered professional forester, who will outline how grassland and fire-resilient science aligns with traditional First Nation land stewardship activities, and how learnings from a local ecosystem restoration initiative are being disseminated province-wide. And I'll introduce Randy in more detail in just a moment. As introductions and land acknowledgements flow in, I'd like to tell you a bit about CMI. CMI is a nonprofit society and an association for people working in the various fields of ecology. We provide professional development opportunities in the form of conferences, courses, and webinars that address everything from field and data science research techniques to complex land management conundrums. On our website is the best way to learn more about CMI, and it contains great resources such as proceedings documents and talk recordings from all of our major events. And now I'd like to pass it over to Kendall Benish from KCP.
Thank you, Marcy. My name's Kendall Benish, and I'm joining you on behalf of Kootenai Conservation Program, or KCP. And we're a diverse network of close to 90 land and water conservation and stewardship groups, federal, provincial, and local governments, First Nations, land trusts, agricultural producers, and educational institutions who all contribute to conserving our region. The purpose of KCP's partnership is to cooperatively conserve the biological diversity and naturally functioning ecosystems of the region through land conservation and stewardship, and to generate the support and resources needed to advance this effort, including building technical knowledge and expertise through webinars like this. We're really excited to be hosting this series again with CMI and would like to give an additional thanks to all of our program sponsors, without whom we would not be able to support this type of work. And just a couple of final housekeeping items from me and we'll get started. So this webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted within a week to both CMI's event webpage and KCP's Winter Webinar Series webpage. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So please use the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar, that little button, not the chat bar, to add a question into the queue, and we'll do our best to make our way through them at the end of Randy's presentation. You'll also notice there's an upvote button in the Q&A, and if there's a question that you'd like to see answered, please use this feature and it'll bump it up in the queue. And back to you, Marcy.
Gotta get that unmute Okay, great, thanks. I'd like to welcome today's speaker, Randy Harris. As I said, he's a registered professional forester and he's based in Cranbrook. He has a diploma in fish and wildlife management from BCIT and a bachelor's degree in forestry from the University of Alberta. For 32 years, Randy worked for BC's Ministry of Forests and also served 6 years as a habitat biologist for BC's Ministry of Environment. Randy spent the last decade of his government career as the team leader of the Ecosystem Restoration, or ER, program in the Rocky Mountain Trench. And he's now working as a forestry consultant for local First Nations, the First Nations Emergency Services Society, the Trench Society, and provincial ER program, assisting with planning, prescriptions, vegetation monitoring, post-burn evaluations, and curating an online library on ecosystem restoration topics. So welcome, Randy, and I'd like to now turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Marcy. And I will suddenly share, and hopefully this works. Okay, there we go. Hopefully you can all see this. I'd like to start off by saying that I am calling in from Cranbrook, which is in the unceded territory of the Tuknaka and Secwepemc Nations, not their unceded territory. And just outline the talk is I'm trying to download 30 years worth of experience in a 33-minute time frame. So if I talk really rapidly, that's because I'm watching the clock telling me how much time I have left. Um, what the, what I'm going to start off with is what is ecosystem restoration, some of our learnings. And a lot of our learnings, when we started checking back with our local First Nations, we found out that there's astonishing overlap as to how we should manage the land base for its best management. Then I've recently been working in the last 5 years on a new mapping project that covers the entire province of British Columbia and taking forward some of our learnings and actually applying it across all the dry forests of BC. And we're going into a prioritization process right now as we speak, and this hopefully is going to be rolled out in the next year or so. And also, maybe you missed it, but I'll talk about it on Tuesday, or there's just this Monday. A new paper came out from the Provincial Forest Advisory Committee on planning and how to go about it. Well, we've got a lot of experience with a district steering committee for ecosystem restoration and the Forest Practices Code. So I'll bring forward our best management practices or what we learned. And just so you know, all reports that are listed in this talk, because I'm going to be referring to a lot of them, are curated at the Susan Bond Memorial Library, and there's the website. And I think Kendall will be actually putting that up. First off, there seems to be, I don't know why there's confusion over it, but ecosystem restoration is just the process of assisting a damaged ecosystem back into a state of health. There's this theory that, oh, you're restoring it to a past condition. No, but the past can act as a template, which is what I'm going to be talking about. Why dry forests? The Terrestrial Ecosystem Restoration Program was started in 2000 by the Ministry of Environment. And the dry forests were held as this is our most endangered ecosystem. It doesn't stop at dry forests, but the process that you're seeing here can be applied to other things like wetlands, streams, and alpine forests. We just started with the grasslands. And one of the things that's a big switch, especially if you're a forester, consider the function of an ecosystem, not just the products. We're always concerned about saw logs as a forester, and now we're getting an obsession about fuel. There's actually 34 resource values to be managed in existing ecosystems. By count, if you actually do the analysis of the legislation and higher level plans and the desires of the local citizens. It's not just one resource. Don't just manage for a resource, because we started off doing forage. I'm talking about the dry forest, but the other name for it is NDT4, Natural Disturbance Type 4. And what that is a fire maintained ecosystem. We know that fires come through frequently and they have a light impact on the land base. Less than 10% of the stand burns. And when you're seeing it, it's this yellowish area here. It's the yellow area here. And And you also have some on Vancouver Island and a bit around Vancouver. It's the bunch grass, ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and coastal Garry oak forests. Uh, this is where we started, and we're actually going to, you'll find out that we're moving uphill too. What are we talking about? There's many ways in which a grassland actually is wiped out. And since 1950, our calculation in the valley is that we have lost 50% of our grasslands. That's based on several reports by Don Gayton and Tim Ross. What you see here is an example just north of Kimberley at the old Kimberley Airport. We managed to thin it, but in 50 years, we had a massive amount of ingrowth. If you keep on ingrowth, meaning that the trees actually started seeding in and they weren't killed by any sort of fire, they just kept on growing and occupying the grassland in place of the grass. So if you have less and less grass, you also have more concentrated grazing, have less grazing available for the ungulates and the cattle. And you also have an ingrowth of invasive plants. And then you also have a lot of recreation traffic. That's all of that is impacting your grasslands and your understory. So in 1995, under the Kootenay Boundary Higher Land Use Plan, higher level plan, an ecosystem restoration program was established. And what they wanted, restored grassland. And a couple of words to make sure, it's a matrix of trees. We have a variety of ecosystems we're actually managing for here, not just an open grassland, but open forest. We concentrated at our first for forage resource, and we actually went well beyond that as we did the work. And we're trying to meet the social, economic, cultural needs of the people. We started off with 109,000 hectares. It's probably about that, but we've recalculated that with better mapping since, but we're supposed to be done by 2030. And the idea is it's not one and done. You have to maintain this ecosystem after it's actually done, because this is well, what we inherited here was a managed landscape. The Tuknaka were actually managing the landscape. Um, let's see, where am I going here? Now, this was actually pretty good. What we had to do is reach out to, we knew vaguely that the First Nations had done a lot of burning out there. We had some rough ideas about it. But what we did is we brought in the tree ring lab at UBC and a PhD candidate called Greg Green, who hopefully he's on the line, but he's out of Williams Lake now, working for Foresight. And we said, could you look at the valley bottom? Because we've been looking at the hillsides a lot, and this isn't being done by the other branches of government, because we have to understand what the historic pattern was. And what he came up with is that the valley bottom appears to have been logged 4 times. We don't really have old growth management areas left. And what we have left is a degraded, dense, immature Douglas fir monoculture, in place of a rich, I think the word is heterogeneous, but I say mosaic because, well, I can spell mosaic. The historic stands averaged about 201 stems per hectare. And right now they're more like 3,000 stems per hectare. Trees were from 5 to 100 cubic meters, and the fire returns were every 11.4 trees, and they were light impact. He could only find examples out of 650 fires of 2 high impact fires. So we have dendrochronology now for all of our valley bottom stands back to 1144 AD. So slightly after the Roman conquest, and we have fire scar data back to 1445. So we have a history of our fire return periods and our fires. This is something which I found in our back books, but in 1885, George Mercer Dawson, who he's the fellow in the white pith helmet here. This is at the mouth of Kitiman Creek, also known as Kikaman, but you see by stem count, you've got a lot of trees in the 20 to 35 centimeter diameter class. But if you go by volume, you've got these whopping big Douglas ponderosa pine trees, and they actually dominate the stand in terms of volume. But this is a visual of what this forest used to look like. Now, the other thing that Greg did is that quite astonishing. He told me about this one stand close to Cranbrook. I went out and actually took some samples, and he aged them for me. What's And many things to learn here. One is we've always told ourselves that the reason we have ingrowth is because we got so gosh darn good at putting out fires after the Second World War because we had helicopters. Our ingrowth started in 1886, in the 1880s. That's the time that the Tuknaka were being forced onto reservations and we removed the original land managers from the land base. So it's back farther larger than you think. And just so you'll realize this, this is one of the samples that you're seeing on this spreadsheet. This tree is 134 years old. It is this big, five, not quite 4 centimeters in diameter. Um, so that's our shock is that I said, but I aged the darn tree. How could I miss it? Well, if you look at dendrochronology, this is how well the tree grew every year, and it's a relative length. So it's sort of like a barcode on what you'll find on the in the grocery store. But what happens, you have a sort of a mountain range here, but in the 1940s, as we hit about 4,000 stems per hectare, the mountain range becomes foothills and slowly decreases. And by the 1980s, this is a signature of density. And this is a signature of climate change because by this point, this tree it hasn't grown since the 80s. It's a green illusion. Basically, it's dead in all but name. It's not growing in diameter. It's not growing in height. It's storing carbon, but it's just waiting for and it's also just waiting for a fire for a match to actually burn the site all off. And there's no grass left in the understory. So basically, we've got we had 108,000 hectares of basically useless land that isn't growing grass, and it's certainly not growing saw logs. Now, what we did is we went back and we talked to the land managers, and we said, well, this is what Greg found out. Could you add to it? And the land managers are from the Teknok and Secwepemc land managers in 2022. And what they said, in an open range site, you burn the grass every other year. And I'm going, okay, that leaves no scars, so that sounds good. But they did verify that that burning the land every 7 to 14, 15 years, um, that's exactly what the elders told them, that they would be burning about that frequently. And they also agreed that you burn in spring to kill the seedlings. And with huckleberries at the moderate to high elevations, retain 50% shade, and you burn every 4 years to actually maintain huckleberry stands. And this is also consistent with information put forward by the Salish firekeepers, Joe Gilchrist. So what we found with this one here is we were using Western science to verify what the elders told us. And actually with that, and you look back at Mercer Dawson photos, they had far more grass than we do in the same stands. I couldn't retake the Dawson photo because it's actually under the Koocanusa Reservoir now, 30 feet of water. And the other thing, prior to this, Don Gayton in 1998 did a final report on ecotax. And what they did is they actually measured crown closure. And I had to estimate how many stems per hectare this was. But when you look at forage, our best growth of forage, our highest production or our greatest biodiversity is actually when we have some trees on site, 20 to 150. The traditional land management practices of the Teknaka would have been a little bit darker. But if you actually want to maximize you would actually drop it down to about 100 to 120. That's in our theory. But the thing to really watch here is 5 to 25%. You can actually get a much more open canopy if you retain your trees in a clumpy formation. Like Greg's studies can't tell us what the crown closure was, but the stem count's just the one measure because that's the easy one. You can do crown closure. And really, according to when we talked to Don Gayton, it might be better if you actually did canopy closure, which is slightly different, hemispherical densiometer, get light coming in from the sides, rather than just straight direct sunlight. And what our stands actually call for is we want to retain now about 150 stems per hectare. That is just to maximize our grass growth and reduce our invasive plants that seem to come in when you open it up too much. I would dearly like to remeasure these sites because we do have all the plot data. We do have a lot of plot data here to deal with this. And this is just an example of ER works. This is in the Cranbrook Community Forest near the College of the Rockies here in Cranbrook. We started off at about 3,000 to 7,000 stems per hectare. That's the photo on the left. We thinned it down to 150. This particular site is 150 stems per hectare, which is within the traditional range. We went from 45 kilograms per hectare per year of grass, and it was very poor quality pine grass. And now we've got 400 kilograms per hectare per year. And most of our grass now is high value bunch grasses, which actually form a good protein source for winter range for ungulates. Where am I now? Now, the other reason to burn is you're going, well, why do you burn? Why don't you just thin? Well, what happens is vegetative effect. If you burn off shrubs, they'll rejuvenate, they'll resprout, and you'll have a thriftier, healthier plant as a result. But also, when you look at bunch grasses, you'll see there's a dead part in the middle of your bunch grass. Similar to trees, it's the outer ring of the plant that actually is actively growing. Those are your growing points. Now, what we want to do is actually run a fire through here just to burn off some of that fuel in the center of the plant, because the fear is if you don't do this, there's so much woody material in the center of your grass plant that it actually will burn too hot during a summer burn and kill the growing points. So you might be killing your grass by not burning. Another reason here is Shirley Ma, who's with when she was with the Ministry of Forest research branch, she did her master's thesis in 2000, and she looked at the traditional use study being done that was carried out by the Taknaka Nation. Once again, I don't have access to that, but I took a look at it, and these are plants that are important food or medicine plants to the Taknaka Nation. And her analysis is that of 165 plants useful to the Taknaka, 127 of them benefited from or required this light impact fire. High impact fires probably kill everything. We're finding that out from some other papers being done near Lytton. What we have to do here is also monitor operations. And this is just to tell you to make sure you look it up because it's in our library. But in 2025, we upgraded our intensive and routine monitoring protocols. Every time you do a project, you should monitor to make sure you came closer to meeting your goals. And we also have intensive monitoring where we set up a permanent sample plot with controls to actually make sure that long-term we're on the right trajectory with our thinning and burning protocols. So it's online. We updated in 2025, and I'd like to say I did a lot of it, but no. My name just happens to be there because I had to collate it. Green Harrison Hughes in 2025. And I think BC Wildfire Service actually has something similar. We have two compilations that are also on our website, which actually says this, and we are quite shocked to see it because what we're finding is the plant composition appears quite good. Invasive plants are not as bad as we feared. They will peak 2 years after the harvest, then drop off, or 2 years after a burn. But there's also this thought that we did a lot of our first monitoring in the 2000s, and because of the droughts we're now having, nothing's doing well. We're having a net loss, but the net loss in untreated ground is worse than the net loss within our treated ground. We're begging to do this again. I think we have another compilation out looking at that very issue because it's most upsetting if the numbers go down. This is something that if you go, well, what does that prove? Those are little studies. Well, this is a synthesis of 40 studies across the United States of America, available again on our website, but we found nothing that varied from this. And there's a much more thorough discussion here. And both those discussions have come out in invasive plants. Invasive plants is a huge problem that the traditional land managers, would never have to deal with. When we say we use their thinking as a template, that's actually, we have to modify it, but they've given us a good idea of how to go about doing these treatments because they had 10,000 years of experimentation. But there's things like invasive plants and permanent cities, towns, and hamlets in the bottom of our valley that are quite different from that will complicate the management that they were doing in 600 years ago. Commercial harvest. Currently, our cut specs are set by the ungulate winter range guidelines. I find it's too open. This is 40 stems per hectare. And I'm going, we really should have 150. There's not a lot of places here for deer or elk to hide because they do have to get out of the range for visual cover or just thermal cover, or just make make the hunters get out of their truck a bit and walk. Um, you can sight your rifle in for half a kilometer through this site. It's a wonderful view, but might not be the best. I'd rather see more trees. This looks gooder. And in fact, I was out here on the weekend, and yeah, there's a fair bit of deer using this. This is 150 stems per hectare. It leaves a lot of residuals, and as we're experimenting with it, we're getting the 5 to 25% crown closure that we want because the trees are left in clumps. Now that's actually better for wind resistance too, because a lot of our stands are close-grown trees and they're whippy, which is really technical words, mean they're very tall but very skinny. And in a high wind, if you leave them in individual pieces, they tend to blow over and snap off. But if you leave them in clumps, there's a better chance that they will stay standing. Let's see. Okay, now one thing that we did do here, I inherited this from the first practitioners of ER in the valley, is that our local foresters would go out and they'd walk the ground and they would decide how many trees per hectare we'd have. Open range is less than 75 stems per hectare. Open forest, 76 to 400, preferably about 150, 120, 150. Closed forest is commercial forest. It's more than 400 stems per hectare. So this is a desired future condition. Like walking the site, basically what's your slope, your aspect, and your site index. And the worse the trees grow, the more the forest is trying to tell you that it would rather grow grass. And we did this for our entire trench. So we had this as a working tool, which doesn't benefit anybody else in the valley. So what happened is working with Foresight and Finesse, the Ecosystem Restoration Program ran similar mapping for a mosaic for the entire province, the NDT4 area of the province. And when you look at it, we have about 5.1 million hectares of NDT4, 3.9 million hectares more or less on Crown land. And when you look at it, the yellow is open range. And open range, it's a very low site index, but it's the warmest sites that we have and the steeper sites that we have. And this jived very well with our ground-proofed examples over in the that we actually produced back in the 2000s. And when you look at it, it also has a rich mosaic of dense forest left behind on north aspects versus the ones on south and west aspects, which are much warmer. And by going by the site index, you might have a site that's on the same aspect, but the tree growth appears to be better according to our vegetation resource inventory mapping. That becomes open forest. That becomes an area which probably is going to be slightly wetter, slightly richer in growing grass. But having a mosaic like this is, when we're looking at this, this looks like a pretty good ungulate winter range because you have a lot of cover and a lot of feeding areas. And you still have enough trees there for the hundreds of other creatures that are going to be living here as well, like the cavity nesters. So what we do with that is that we take our current forest cover and we overlaid it with recent harvesting and the ER projects we've done to date, and we come up with what's a good fit. Now, the areas that are recent harvest, when what the current condition is, this is just we're using the same classifications. We split them up a bit finer to split them up, and where's the most recent harvest? So current condition, desired future condition, or resilient forest condition. Now you line up those two, and everything on this map that's green, a good match. It's a direct match. A good match is yellow. So we're going, okay, that is inherently what should be on site according to the site index. And then when you get to poor, you're getting some pink areas. There's some pink areas here and over here. These are pieces that actually should be treated because they're not in alignment with the inheritability of that site to grow trees. available province-wide. And if anybody's wondering about it, this is Cranbrook International Airport, and this is the Yakima Reserve, and this is the town of Cranbrook itself, down here, this big white area. Hopefully you can see my cursor jumping around. So what comes out of this is there's another, when you're talking about land-based at risk, if you have areas that are out of sync, especially open forest areas, we also did a bit of analysis to show that these are the areas that burn the hottest. You'll have the highest impact on the land base. You'll actually burn the site off. So what we actually have here is roughly 1 million hectares, or 1.3 million hectares that really should be treated to avoid damaging the soil, damaging the land base. These are areas that are at risk of burning. Now you're looking at 1.3 million. We're only doing province-wide, a couple thousand hectares a year. We're not doing that many hectares. So we prioritize. Now, this is our first, looking at my notes. This is our first cut at it. This is going to be, Finesse is rerunning this now because we've actually redone it. But we came up with 16 factors. These are just reasons to thin the forest. And they won't vary that much. And there's mapping layers available for a lot of them. And we went through it. We have local planning layers here in the district that we would use as well. Things like high conservation value forests or a few other things like that. But province-wide, let's give somebody a start. This is your first cut at which area should you go to treat first. When we send this out, we send the map layers out with it. I'll go back here. And what we expect is planning tables to actually work with it and bring in their own tables too, because everybody's been worried about this for a long time. There's a lot of products out there. The ones that we keyed in on out of the 16 is ungulate winter range for elk and sheep. Oh, this is a twitchy little thing. Come on. Go back. Old growth. NDT4 only, you should thin the old growth just to actually maintain the large old trees that has. Anyone else's ogmas, we're not talking about them, only NDT4. Terrain stability, we've got terrain stability mapping. I wish I had a staple mapping product here. Nope, go back. Nope. 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 There, back to the table. If you actually burn off the forest cover and you have a high burn on unstable slopes, it'll slough off and go into the creeks. And you've seen this in the Nicola Valley. Big issue for the people there. Community watersheds, similarly. You should thin your community watersheds to maintain water quality. And there's also the flammability of the forest, which is the provincial strategic threat analysis provided by the BC Wildfire Service. So those are the ones that we did. And you have a maximum score of about 16. And we produce maps that say red is areas that have a lot of values on it. So those areas you should look at first. Yellow is medium. We're rerunning this map as we speak because we're trying to break it into more categories so you can do lumping and splitting. And medium can be low medium, high medium. Let's actually split it into 5 classes and try to actually say, here's the areas to look at first. These maps are going to be drafted up soon, should be out in the next month. And it gives you a handle on where we can't do all 1.3 million, but which ones should we do first? The ones with the highest values. And WUI is one of the values, but a lot of this is biological values. Now, there's another thought here to just throw in is that we're starting with the NDT4, and we're going to go backwards here. Stop that. This is an area just near Radium. This is the Shuswap Band's Reserve. And I do know that the band is actually talking about doing some treatment on the hillsides, but you can actually see with my little cursor, the grassland went well up the hill, is well open. We've lost a lot of bighorn sheep habitat here. They would like to return the bighorn sheep habitat to this area here. So how are we going to do that? Yeah, it is interesting, but it gives you about an idea of we want to go to the NDT3. the NDT3, which is montane spruce, some of the ICHs, and so forth, there's a rather different thing. What happens in the main trench here, the areas above the Douglas fir forest is still Douglas fir, although it's called montane spruce. And it behaves very similarly to the forest on the valley bottom. Now, if you go up the other side drainages like the Elk and the Palliser and the White Rivers, it's lodgepole pine. That's a different fire regime. The fire regimes there kills more of the stand. The fires are less frequent. But in the main trench, the fires on this hillside are a little less frequent, but mostly it's light impact. And we definitely know that the First Nation management techniques, because these photos are from 1906, they did the hillsides as well. And very surprising to find out that when I talked to one of the Agnosti, he told me they did a backing fire, and I asked, how did you get a backing fire to go downhill? And well, we started talking to a fire boss, and he goes, well, you wait till the evening, because then you have a katabatic winds and the wind rolls downhill because the air is rising in the valley bottom because it's hotter. Cold winds come down from the mountains. That's how you push a fire downhill. So now this came out on Monday. I have, and what I've been watching my news feed is, what does this mean? This is from the Provincial Forestry Advisory Council that got set up last July. And yeah, it's pretty radical. It actually talks about doing away with timber supply areas and actually forming local regional councils to actually overtake on the management of the forests in conjunction with the First Nations and other groups. And we're going, wow, that was pretty surprising. Like, I'm wanting to see where this goes, but some of the user groups are saying there's a lot of good ideas here. Let's go forward with it to explore this more. So I'm not going to second guess it, but most of what this presentation of all these maps has been, this is products that's actually been put forward by the ER program to the provincial government. And I should point out that all of that mapping has been done by Finesse. Finesse is actually doing the last runs on all those maps, and Finesse is the First Nations Emergency Services Society. And they'll be bringing the products that you've just seen out to the bands to actually see which way they want to go with it, because there's a ton of planning tables going on around here. And we'll go backwards because I got a lot of things to say here. Obviously, we're going to do some sort of landscape planning soon. We're not sure, but I did run a local council overseeing the Ecosystem Restoration Council with a lot of NGOs and intermittent help from the First Nations for about 10 years. It worked quite well, and it looked something like this. And what exactly does this mean? Well, sit at a round table is the big thing. It took us 30 years of fighting with everybody sitting in their little silos and refusing to meet with the other people. And that was the hunters on one side and the ranchers on the other. We didn't resolve any issues. How we resolved issues is that you get everybody into the same room and you talk it through, and you have to understand each other and start to trust each other. The first step here is understand each other, that you're living here, and then start building towards developing you saw that silly little mission statement? That's what we agree on. Where do we agree? So that's how you actually start building a consensus that this is what we should be doing. Let's start moving towards a course of action. And if you're sitting here looking one roundtable, well, really we ran the program with 3 roundtables, because if you're actually reading the legislation, government and First Nations have to form their own table under the DREPA Act, because that's yeah, it's a government to government relationship. It's very different than the relationship between government and licensees or local communities. Now, the thing that's actually and the other thing is that what worked in the Forest Practice Code days is focus on the land base, not necessarily upon your ideology or what should be done or policy from whatever group. Focus on the land base. Just what does it need? And the solutions actually come out a lot clearer and great. And you need a consensus. And that consensus comes from talking to each other, that you would get behind that. And consensus doesn't mean you get everything you want. It just means that overall, this is a major step forward for your organization and its objectives. We have to understand what your objectives are. That's the purpose behind integrated planning, finding out where everyone's objectives are and getting something done. And one of my supervisors once told me, because we were having some trouble at some of our tables, he said, a consensus is a game that only adults can play. You actually have to give some stuff up. It's a negotiated settlement. Another thing that actually has to happen here is I drew a circle around these folks here. These are your implementers. Like most of our tree thinning was done by licensees. Like we were going about 1,400 hectares of harvest per year by licensees, and we would argue about the results of it. But the NGOs, they could go out and raise the funds required to do the prescribed burning, the follow-up, the invasive plant treatments, things like that. And we were getting about 430 hectares of prescribed burning done every year, and sometimes we go higher, and 1,100 hectares of spacing and pile burning. It's dropped off since, but and we would do things like the Trench Society was our local implementing partner here. We needed them at all the tables because you need to talk to the implementer as to what's possible and how big can we go. And quite surprisingly, the Trench Society would give them $200,000 of government funds. We just give them a grant, and they'd come back with 1.4 million. So we could get a lot more work done. It's a major multiplier of any government efforts. We're not denigrating government efforts, but it's just that it actually helps if you actually have that money to leverage more funding from an entire ecosystem of funding sources that are willing to see habitat being created. The other thing is we need a one plan that comes out of this. And it's a long-term relationship. So you actually need a lot of the locals here to actually, because it's going to be ongoing. It's not you write up the plan, one and done. You also have to oversee and monitor it, which is what we were doing. The other thing is I combined ecosystem restoration interface projects, which were being run by local communities, and wildlife habitat projects into one plan because I'm lazy. I couldn't be bothered doing 3 different plans when I only needed one. And you also go cross-jurisdictional, cross-boundary. We actually, who's not at this particular table, who's not drawn here because it's too complicated, BC Parks, the Nature Conservancy Canada, Nature Trust of BC, and all the local bands would put their work under the same map so that we could actually leverage off each other. It's a lot easier to actually leverage money if the funders can actually see that you're actually a landscape level plan with a lot of local buy-in. I don't know where we're going to fit this in, but we're calling this now a fire stewardship plan because when we're talking to the First Nations for feedback, they said, well, really what you're talking about is fire stewardship. Okay, and I'll leave it there. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Randy. That was wonderful and such a thorough presentation, taking us through the history and the value of ER initiatives. So appreciate all the information you pulled together for us today. So we have about 15 minutes left, and if you haven't already, please add your questions using the Q&A button on the toolbar, and I'll do my best to relay them to Randy and have us wrapped up by 1 o'clock. And again, please use the upvote if there's a question or two that you like in the Q&A already. So I'm going to start out with this one. This is from Brian Gustafson, and he says, thanks, Randy. And this is part of his question. So prescribed fire is such an important tool in our toolbox. I find that most information sessions and webinars are preaching to the converted. Society still remains highly terrified of fire and is beyond hesitant to welcome it back on the landscape. Do you have any suggestions for managing engagement and reaching the unconverted?
Yes. What we actually had is, you'll notice that the name of our memorial library is Susan Bond Memorial Library. We actually hired a contractor with our overhead to actually take on a communications role. And we would have regular monthly updates on what was going on, and she would actually attend every place up and down the valley and keep talking to people. So, and this was being run somewhat in, we would have a lot of input from government, but we ran it independent of government because uh, just for clarity of messaging. Because quite often government agencies want, you have to use this word, but the other government agency wants to use a slightly different word. So we just, yeah, it's buy yourselves a thesaurus. It's actually the same thing. And just to get that messaging out and treat it as part of the process. Like that was part of our overhead is to actually have a communication strategy. And we would have newsletters out. We have our own we have our own website, and we were doing newsletters. But since they left it to me, I'm going. I don't do newsletters. This is it. Um, but definitely do that and reach out to the public. And if you are going to talk to a group of people in the field, a field visit makes a lot of difference. All these historic photos that I've shown you, they make a big difference because you're saying this is what it looked like 50 years ago. We're trying to get closer to it. These visuals are actually helpful. And if that fails, if we're going right up to somebody's property line, bring the fire chief with you. Nobody's going to believe a civil servant, but they will believe the fire chief. Because if you tell somebody that I'm going to cut down all the trees out of the side of your fence line and then burn it, surprisingly, they have a lot of comments. Not all of them good. But bring the fire chief because the fire chief knows why we're doing this. And we've had a lot of in-depth talks with them. And I also used to maintain a list of if you actually want to convince this small town, phone Jane. I goes, who's Jane? Have coffee with Jane. And I found out Jane is at the root of the phone tree, such as it was, and she would tell everyone else in town. And so for a cup of coffee, you can get well, you cut off a lot of work by actually having to do a lot of explanation. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. So here's another one from Mark Trudeau. So he may have something to add to this too. The ER program's been operating for almost 30 years. And so he'd like you to provide some key learnables, good or bad, that you feel has come out of the CR program over time.
Of the things that are good or bad, and what's actually come out of this report on Monday is that local people getting involved in forest management actually makes it a lot easier to get jobs done because they focus on what has to be done. And quite often, if you bring in something like the Trench Society, um, the dumbest, simplest example is don't take the lowest bid. You can do a request for a proposal, but government policy is now take the lowest bid. And you're going, well, I don't know if I want this contractor on site because I don't think he read the prescription. Just things like the deliverables are, um, for me, I probably couldn't have made these accomplishments if I had to do write the contracts as well, because the contracting process is actually quite onerous within government. But if you bring in a lot of outside governments to do the work, I could devote myself just to doing the planning and the oversight on the work that was being done. Government should be doing that. Whereas you spend so much time in on a lot of contract administration. If you have a limited staff, contract administration can be contracted out as long as you have good guidelines. The other thing is you need a multi-year, multi-jurisdiction plan. It takes you at least 3 years to actually get a project off the ground. You can't just do one and done. As it is right now, we're going from prescription to prescription, and there's not really, and we're only doing an annual plan at a time. You should be doing at least a 5-year plan because it takes you 3 years just to get a prescription off the ground. And you should be making comments at that or fly. Um, those are the things we should be learning. Also, we need monitoring and we need it consistently. And the idea was many years ago is that we never have quite enough money to do monitoring. But what you can do is everybody puts in their $5,000 or $10,000, and that's quite a large monitoring program. Like the EO program that I was looking at had 19 proponents, and all of them had a tiny amount of monitoring data. But if you add it all together and we hire the same crew to do the same work, it gets consistent really quickly. And we have one monitoring standard, and it's much easier to improve it if you actually have one team doing it, as opposed to people writing up their own monitoring standards. Three
Okay,
examples, anyways.
great. Thanks. And so we've got Don Gayton here with us today. And so Don's asking Randy, I'm working a lot in the low elevation open grasslands and forest steppe in the South Okanagan. There's no dendropyrochronology record for these areas. But can I assume that the indigenous culture fires that we have documented in assuming the ponderosa forests up above the grassland shrub steppe were actually started in the grassland shrub steppe down below?
They would be at least that. But our talks with the local Tuknaka, like asked the Salish firekeepers for a better angle, but I was surprised to find out they were burning every other year. So it's actually a different cycle. So I'd say it's not the same because our elders here were actually telling us that every other year they'd burn. And Joe Gilchrist was saying every other year they'd burn in the Salish area. So the Silex area, probably something similar. I think they burnt it far more often.
And then another question is from Dylan Begin, or Begin. Through comparison of historical imagery and current imagery of the Elk Valley in the NDT3, there appear to be many areas where forest encroachment into grasslands and brushlands has occurred, including high elevation grasslands and bighorn sheep winter range. You mentioned lodgepole pine forests in this area, resulting in higher intensity fires on the landscape. But can you provide any thoughts on the value opportunity of thinning and burning treatments to benefit grasslands and ungulate winter range and some of the other forests in the MS and ESSF ecosystems where other species are present? Douglas fir, spruces, subalpine fir, etc.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, I've looked at that, and I'll throw in something that's actually rather interesting. What we found out is the Crow's Nest Valley was visited by George Murray Dawson in 1883, and what he pointed out is that the whole area had been burnt off and the trees killed by the white settlers, but right adjacent to it is the North Flat, the North Kootenai Pass, the South Kootenai Pass, and he pointed out the First Nations resided there, and they did burning there. So there's an entirely different burning regime in the Flathead from the burns that occurred in the Elk Valley. So I think a lot of what you've had there from walking the side drainages, and I haven't been up a lot up the Elk Valley, but I've had to do more work up the Palliser. You'll find remnant Douglas fir out there. And I think at one point it was very much similar to the main trench. And my suggestion, because we're going into this new climatic era with it, is start moving away from lodgepole pine because lodgepole pine does not tolerate drought well, but Douglas fir might. And and if you put in Douglas fir thinned, you can start creating somewhat artificial fuel breaks. And there's a lot of areas of the Elk Valley that'll grow aspen, which is really disappearing in the main trench. And I think a lot of it's drought, but it's wetter there. You might actually want to start planning more of a new type of forest where there's fuel breaks where you can actually stop a fire by using other trees. And that's one of these reasons we're looking at it, because when you look at that NDT3, um, I'm quite sure we're going to find building blocks, little hills of South Aspect, because I've already seen them, of South Aspect sites that are either an open pocket grassland or a Douglas fir hillside. And if you actually use those as building breaks, you might be able to build something like a fuel break across the land base, but it might require a species conversion from ponderosa pine to Douglas fir, something a more fire resilient species or large. I think we'd have to start thinking about that. And definitely, if you see these photos here, the tree line has crawled up these mountains. And that's actually in white with five needle pine. There's far more trees in the subalpine forest than we used to have. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things to be learned from these photos, and also just realizing that what used to be there um, is masked a lot by settler burning activity. Jen Barron did some very good mapping on that. but also where are we going to be? Because again, like this is restoration. We're not going to the back. Something bad is going to be happening to us in the future. I think we should start preparing for it because we're dealing with our forests are taking us 80 to 100 years to grow. We have to think now about it.
Okay, thanks, Randy. We've got two more, so I think we could make
Oh,
it. Okay, so one is coming from Taryn Scalbania, and she says loads of science coming from Australia and the USA, the John Muir Project, cautioning against prescribed burns. Any comment on their warnings? Do we trust it in the wrong hands? It can become a tool in the toolbox for more commercial logging, degradation, and deforestation.
hmm. Well, we've never thought of giving it over to the commercial interests. What this is coming very directly from the First Nations, and they're actually wanting to continue their prescribed burning activities in the New World. So it's one of those, if you do it wrong, well, any activity, if you do it wrong, it doesn't make sense. But that's why I put forward these reports out of the United States and directions from the range branch. Um, it's better to do this prescribed burning because this is what the ecosystem is used to. I think a lot of the thought that has gone into this is stating that if we remove humans from the land base, everything works out. If you remove humans from the land base, you get this. You get a dense, overstacked stand. And really, the one tool to actually keep these forests open is fire. And it's a maintenance treatment. And it's not a question so much is it natural or artificial, because when I talk to the First Nations, they're very clear that the role of humans is that you are part of nature, you are part of this community, and you do have to make decisions for the rest of the community. And the rest of the community does better with the fire if it's properly applied. And the phrase is properly applied, is that when we do our calculations from weather stations to do a spring burn, I found out quite by accident that we actually ended up at the same interval um, that the First Nations were using, because what they would do is they'd go out and see which plants were flowering. But our weather station got us to the same 2 week window. And that flower would only be in this condition for 4 days. And it was very exact because the flower makes the same calculations that the weather station did before it grows. So when you're saying there could be problems there, it goes, well, yes, that's why we're doing monitoring. And those documents that you've seen, they've been accepted by finesse. And in fact, the First Nations are being trained to do the monitoring to make sure that we are on the right path. We're not spreading invasive plants. And the good plants that we want reappearing on site out of this densely shaded area are reappearing.
Great, thanks. So we just got a quick message here from Rob Gay that says that for those concerned about wildfire, he's supporting a documentary film
Mm-hmm.
called BC is Burning that's showing at Key
That's
City Theater on February
on the
12th
12th.
at 6 p.m. Is that Cranbrook?
That's Cranbrook at the Key City.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks, Rob. Okay. One more quick question here from Greg Ferguson, and then we'll wrap it up and let everybody get on with their day. So, given the amount of second growth forest in BC and its state, as you've said, in some cases, dense monocultures, what do you think are the main barriers to restoring those existing forests and the second growth forests to come? New or ongoing logging?
Well, part of it is redirect the logging. Like what a lot of this stuff here is the reason we made as much changes as we had is that Don Gate, who gave us a question here, pursued with data. Like just when you go out there and you actually find out that when you find out things like a lot of your logging, we're never going to get this into a 2x4. Actually take a better a look at what you're looking at. And just the fact that we did away with, we've known about forests like this forever. I joined in 1979. We knew forests would end up like this. And the number used was 5,000 stems per hectare for Douglas fir and 4,000 for lodgepole pine. The obstacles in the way are stocking standards and just could we get a hierarchy of what are we managing for? Because the default is now saw logs. And this is never going to be a saw log. it's going to take you too much money to try to turn this into something like a saw log. Start thinking about if you're going to have economic activity on the land base, which is what the small towns need because we're losing our industrial base. Why not think of different forest products? I'm working on a project that we're thinking we could turn this into biochar, and it might actually be valuable enough that that works because we're going to have short, small trees. But if you actually look at this, if you have better local control um, over the land base or better planning over the land base locally, um, yeah, you can actually make a lot of differences because local people don't follow policy very well. And back in the day, policy is not law. We have to stay within the confines of the law. But if you could overrule some of the rules, and if you do read that report from the Provincial Forest Advisory Council, you'd actually find out that they've identified a lot of things that I didn't have time to deal with here that could lead us to a better idea, better ideas or better ways of actually just meeting our needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. And a lot of it is making your decision as close to the forest as you can. And it sounds like the minister's office is very keen on that.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Randy. There were a lot of great questions and good fielding of all of them. Thanks to everyone who tuned in today and for all of our sponsors. And we look forward to seeing you all in
Okay,
two
thanks.
weeks on February 19th to join us for Delaney Hall's talk on using traditional knowledge and science and restoration using beaver mimicry to revive our watershed within the Okanagan Nation. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.